This woman named Sally left her 2 years old daughter home alone with her neighbor's dog to go out and party with her friends. But what she saw when she came back from the party was so devastating. Here's what happened. Once upon a time, in a small African town, there was a beautiful woman named Sally. Sally was as beautiful as the morning sun. People loved her because of her beauty and her lively spirit. She had a way of making everyone laugh, and no one could resist her charm. Sally had been married 4 times before, but she never had a child. She always dreamed of having a big family, but somehow that never happened. Sally loved to go to parties. Oh yes, Sally was always the life of any gathering. Whether it was a family gathering, a town meeting, or a big celebration. She couldn't resist the fun, the laughter, and the chance to show off her beauty. She had many friends, and among them were 3 special ones. These were her best friends, the ones who always gave her advice, and Sally trusted them. They told her to never stop living her life and to enjoy herself no matter what. Her first husband, however, was not so happy with Sally's ways. He didn't like how she spent so much time with her friends and went to so many parties. He was a quiet man who liked peace, but Sally loved excitement. She would invite her friends over to gossip and laugh. And this made her husband very angry. Sally, you need to slow down and focus on us, he would tell her. But Sally didn't listen. She enjoyed being surrounded by her friends more than anything else. This went on for a while, but soon her first husband had had enough. He told Sally, if you keep on like this, we will not last. But Sally didn't want to change, and so her first marriage ended. She didn't shed a tear because she was sure that she would find another man. After all, she was still young, beautiful, and everyone in town loved her. Not long after, Sally got married again. But just like before, Sally never listened to her husband's complaints about her partying. She was always busy with her friends, laughing, talking, and planning their next big party. One day, Sally was in the kitchen preparing yam porridge. The pot was on the fire, the smell of spices filling the air. But before the yam could even soften, her friends arrived, their laughter breaking through the walls like a sudden storm. Sally, come and hear what happened to Mama Lady at the market, one of them shouted. Without a second thought, Sally wiped her hands on her wrapper and rushed outside. They sat under the big mango tree, giggling and whispering like birds in the early morning. They talked and laughed until the sun began to set. Sally got so caught up with the gossip and the excitement that she forgot all about the food on the fire. Her friends were in her house, talking and laughing, and Sally didn't notice the smoke that started rising from the kitchen. By the time Sally remembered, the smoke was thick and the fire had already started to spread. The flames danced high in the air, and Sally rushed to put it out, but it was too late. The whole kitchen was burning, and soon the fire spread to the rest of the house. Sally's husband came rushing home, his face turning pale when he saw the fire. He was so angry, his voice trembling as he shouted, "Look at what you've done, Sally. You were too busy with your friends to care about our home. The fire burned everything. It took away the things they had worked so hard for, and it left Sally's husband with nothing but disappointment and rage." Sally felt terrible, but she didn't know how to fix it. Her husband, feeling hopeless, turned to her and said, "I can't live like this anymore. Pack your things and leave." Sally didn't say a word. She knew he was right, but she didn't want to lose him. Her husband couldn't forgive her, and with a heavy heart, he sent her away. Sally's heart sank. She ran to her friends for advice. "Beg him? For what?" one of them said, rolling her eyes. "If he can't understand that mistakes happen, then he's not the man for you. You're beautiful, Sally." There are many rich men out there who would be lucky to have you." With her friend's words ringing in her ears, Sally packed what was left of her belongings and left without looking back. Sally went back to her parents' house, but instead of learning her lesson, she kept doing what she always did. Her parents were worried. "Sally," they said, "you need to stop listening to those friends of yours. They are leading you down the wrong path. They are ruining your life." But Sally only laughed, her smile as sweet as ripe pawpaw. "Papa, you don't understand. This is how life works now. Nobody stays indoors and becomes somebody," she would say, brushing them off like dust from her fine wrappers. She believed her friends knew better, and she refused to change. So, Sally stayed the same. And once again, her life took another turn. This time, it would be the second divorce. Sally didn't take long to find another husband. She soon remarried for the third time. At first, everything seemed fine. Her new husband was kind and hardworking. They had their moments of joy, and Sally tried to be a good wife, but her love for parties and gossip never went away. She would sneak out at night to join her friends, leaving her husband alone at home. Sally always believed that she had the right to have fun, no matter what. Her new husband started noticing the same problem. Every time he came home, after a long day at work, Sally was either out partying or gossiping with her friends. He would ask her, "Sally, why do you spend so much time with them? We're supposed to be building a life together." But Sally didn't care. She loved the fun, the laughter, and the excitement too much. Her husband would often sit quietly, feeling lonely and neglected, but Sally didn't see it. After some time, her husband couldn't take it anymore. He told her, "This isn't working, Sally. I need a wife who stays with me and doesn't run off every chance she gets." And so, just like her first two husbands, he divorced her. Sally didn't cry or beg. She didn't feel as bad as she thought she would, because after all, she didn't have any children to lose. She wasn't losing anything. With nowhere else to go, Sally moved in with one of her friends, a single mother who also didn't have a husband. Her friend gave her bad advice, telling her, "You'll be fine, Sally. There are plenty of men in the world. Don't worry about what your family says." Sally thought her friend knew what she was talking about, so she kept following the same old ways. She married again and again and again, but no children ever came. Divorce after divorce, Sally found herself in the same place. No family, no children, and no real happiness. Yet, Sally kept going, never learning from her mistakes, always blaming her marriages for not working out. Sally never gave up on her dream of having a good life. She was always looking for the next big chance, the next rich man who could change her life. One day, at a grand party in the town, Sally met a man named Taju. Taju was a handsome, wealthy man, known for his riches and kindness. He had never been married, and at 40, he was starting to think it was time. When he saw Sally, he was immediately drawn to her beauty and charm. Sally, always ready for a chance to live a better life, smiled at Taju, and they quickly became friends. Sally, being the social butterfly she was, knew how to win anyone over. Taju liked Sally's warmth and laughter, and before long, they were spending more and more time together. He was different from the men she had married before. He didn't mind her socializing, but he had one rule: no parties, no friends visiting the house. Sally agreed, thinking it was a small price to pay for the life she had always dreamed of. Taju and Sally got married soon after. Sally felt like this was the beginning of something truly special. She moved into his large, beautiful house, and though she missed her parties and friends, She promised herself she would make this marriage work. Soon, Sally was pregnant with Taju's child. After 10 long years of waiting, she was finally going to be a mother. The day came when Sally gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The whole town celebrated with her. Sally was overjoyed, holding her daughter close to her chest. Finally, after all the failed marriages and disappointments, she had what she had always wanted, her own child. She looked at her baby and thought to herself, this is the life I've always dreamed of. But little did she know, her love for parties and her past would soon come back to challenge her new life. Sally's friends, who had always been a big part of her life, couldn't stand to see her settle down. They were used to her wild ways, parties, gossip, and endless fun. Now that she was married to the richest man in the town, they didn't want her to stop living the life they had always known. Months passed and Sally seemed to have found her rhythm. Her days were filled with laughter from her baby girl, and Taju's love made their home as warm as a sunny day. But just as rivers don't stay still, Sally's restless spirit began to stir again. One afternoon, her friends came to visit. They arrived with their usual energy, their voices like a whirlwind. "Sally, have you heard?" one of them asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Heard what?" Sally asked, bouncing her baby on her lap. "The biggest party of the year is happening next week," another friend exclaimed. "Everyone who's anyone will be there. You can't miss it." Sally shook her head. "I've left that life behind. My place is here with my baby and my husband." But her friends wouldn't take no for an answer. They leaned closer, their words dripping with temptation. "Sally, you're the wife of the richest man in the village. What's the harm in going to one party? Just this once, for old time's sake. After all, you can't let people forget who you are." Sally's heart wavered. She remembered the cheers, the attention, the way people admired her at parties. But she also thought of Taju's strict rules and her little girl's tiny hands clutching her finger. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Taju will never allow it." "Don't worry about Taju," one friend said, waving her hand as if brushing away a fly. "We'll help you sneak out. He won't even know you are gone." "But what about my baby?" Sally asked, glancing at her daughter, who was now asleep in her arms. "You'll only be gone for a few hours," they said. "The dog next door can watch her. It's harmless." Sally's mind was like a stormy sea, torn between the life she was trying to build and the thrill her friends promised. "This will be the last time," she whispered to herself. "Just one party, and then I'll stop." Her friends smiled, knowing they had won. They left with a plan in place. On the night of the party, Sally would slip out while Taju was away, leaving her baby behind. "It'll be perfect," they said. But they didn't know the storm they were setting into motion. The day of the party arrived, and Sally's heart raced like a drumbeat. She had dressed simply, not wanting to draw suspicion, but her mind was full of excitement. She waited until Taju left the house, his footsteps fading like a distant echo. Her friends were already waiting nearby, their eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Let's go," one of them urged. But Sally hesitated, looking back at her little girl, who was playing with her tiny fingers on the floor. "I can't leave her alone," Sally said, her voice trembling. One friend quickly chimed in. "Don't worry. The neighbor's dog is there, and it loves her. Just leave her with the dog. You'll be back before anyone notices." Sally frowned. It didn't feel right, but the thought of missing the party tugged at her heart. "She'll be fine," another friend said, smiling. "Dogs are loyal. It'll protect her." After a moment of hesitation, Sally nodded, her resolve breaking. She kissed her daughter on the forehead and whispered, "I'll be back soon." The little girl giggled, her innocence a sharp contrast to the decision her mother had just made. Quietly, Sally slipped out of the house and joined her friends. They moved quickly, their laughter trailing behind them like whispers in the wind. Sally's baby was left alone, the neighbor's big dog lying nearby, its sharp eyes scanning the empty room. The party was everything Sally had missed and more. The music was loud, the food delicious, and the drinks flowed like a river. Sally danced as if the world belonged to her, her friends cheering her on. She laughed until her sides ached and drank until her thoughts blurred. For the first time in months, she felt like the Sally she used to be. Hours passed, but Sally didn't notice. Each song seemed better than the last, and each drink sweeter than the one before. Her friends teased her, "You're still the queen of the dance floor." But while Sally was lost in the fun of the party, her baby girl was having a very different experience at home. The dog, left alone with the baby, began to grow restless. The dog, usually calm, started acting strangely. It had been a long day, and the baby, confused and alone, began to cry. The dog, feeling threatened or confused by the baby's cries, became aggressive. The dog snapped, biting the little girl. It was a painful bite, and the baby screamed in terror, but there was no one there to help. The baby girl, unable to defend herself, suffered alone while the dog kept its watch, not knowing how to comfort the child. It bites the baby a few more times thinking she'll keep quiet, but the baby's cries went unheard, and time passed slowly. With lots of blood in its mouth, the dog didn't stop until the girl stopped crying, stopped moving, and eventually fell to the ground, unconscious. Sally, lost in the music and cheers at the party, had no idea of the tragedy unfolding at home. She danced, laughed, and drank, the memory of her baby's giggles slipping further and further away with each passing hour. After the party, the night had grown quiet. Sally was feeling happy, her heart light with the joy of the evening. She couldn't wait to get home and see her baby girl. The music still echoed in her mind as she walked through the door, expecting everything to be just as she left it. But as she neared her house, something didn't feel right. She noticed neighbors gathered outside, talking in hushed voices, their faces filled with concern. Her heart skipped a beat, a cold feeling creeping over her. She rushed through the crowd, pushing past people until she reached the doorway. What she saw froze her in place. There, on the floor, lay her 2-year-old daughter, lifeless, her tiny body covered in scratches. The neighbor's dog, blood dripping from its mouth, was being held tightly by its owner. Taju was standing in the middle of the room, his face dark with fury. "Where were you, Sally?" he roared, his voice cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. Sally couldn't speak. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "It was just for a few hours," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Taju's slap came like lightning, stinging her cheek and sending her sprawling to the ground. "You left our child for a party? A party?" His voice was filled with rage, his hands trembling as he pointed at her. "You don't deserve to be a mother." The neighbors murmured, some shaking their heads, others wiping away tears. "How could she do this?" one woman whispered. "How could a mother leave her baby like this?" Without another word, Taju called the police. When they arrived, they placed cold handcuffs on Sally's wrists. Her cries filled the night as they led her away. "I didn't mean it," she screamed. "I didn't mean for this to happen." But the damage was done, and the silence of her child was louder than her pleas. Sally spent her days in a cold jail cell, staring at the walls that seemed to close in on her. No one came to visit her, not a single friend. The same women who had laughed and danced with her at the party, had fled the town, too scared to face Taju's wrath. Sally was alone, left to drown in her guilt. When she was finally released, the world outside felt different. The sun didn't seem as bright, and the wind carried whispers of her shame. Taju met her at the gates, his expression hard as stone. "We're done," he said simply. "You've taken everything from me. Leave and never come back." He handed her a small bag of her belongings and walked away without looking back. Sally stood there, broken and empty, her tears soaking the dust beneath her feet. With nowhere else to go, Sally returned to her parents' house. They opened the door without hesitation, their eyes filled with sadness, but no anger. "We warned you," her father said softly, "but you never listened." Sally dropped to her knees, clutching her mother's wrapper like a child, seeking comfort. "I was wrong," she sobbed. "I let my friends ruin me." Her parents took her in, but the house felt like a tomb. Every corner reminded her of her mistakes. Every silence echoed with the sound of her daughter's cries. Sally spent the rest of her days in regret, mourning the life she had destroyed with her carelessness. Her beauty faded with time, and so did the memory of the woman who once ruled the parties. The villagers spoke of her as a cautionary tale, a reminder that bad company can lead even the brightest star into darkness. Sally was left with nothing but the weight of her choices, a burden she carried like a heavy load until the end of her days. I hope you enjoyed the tale. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell for more enchanting tales like this one. Goodbye. Muna was rich, more wealthy than anyone in the village, and beautiful like the morning sun. But this village had a strange problem. For 20 years, no one had given birth to a baby boy. Every time a child was born, it was always a girl. The villagers were worried. The king of the village was very old. His beard was as white as the clouds, and his hands shook when he walked. The people knew he couldn't be king for much longer. They needed a new king, but there was a big problem. No boys had been born for years, only girls. The chief priest, a man with wisdom as deep as the river, gathered the people together. He told them, "The first woman to give birth to a baby boy will have her son crowned as the new king." The people were shocked. Could it really be true? A boy born in the village would become the next king. From that day on, every woman in the village wanted to have a baby boy. Everyone was desperate to give birth to a son who would wear the crown. They prayed, they hoped, and some even cried to the gods. But still, only baby girls were born. The village was filled with the sound of newborn girls crying, but there was no sound of a baby boy's cry anywhere. Muna, sitting in her grand house, watched as the women of the village struggled to have a son. She smiled to herself, thinking, "I must be the one to give birth to the next king." The village waited and waited, but no boys came, and so the race for a baby boy began, and the village held its breath, wondering who would be the one to finally give them a new king. Muna wasn't just rich, she was also the neatest woman in the whole village. Her house shone like the morning dew on leaves. Her pots and plates sparkled like stars in the night. Every corner of her house was spotless. People said, "Muna's house is so clean, even the wind won't leave dust behind." Muna had many maids who worked for her. They cleaned, cooked, and fetched water from the mountains for her. Muna didn't drink from the village stream like everyone else. She always sent her maids to climb the high mountain and fetch the cleanest water. "Make sure your hands are clean before touching my water pot," she would say to her maids. Not that the village's stream water was dirty, no, but Muna doesn't just drink from it, and the reason is best known to her. Her maids obeyed because everyone knew how strict Muna was about neatness. But little did they know that Muna held a big and dangerous secret about the village stream that not even the chief priest knew about. However, people in the village admired her, but they also feared her. She was beautiful and wealthy. Yes, but there was something about her that made people whisper when she wasn't looking. "Muna is proud," they would say. "She thinks she is better than all of us." But Muna didn't care. She walked with her head held high, her clothes always shining brighter than the sun. Yet, for all her riches and neatness, Muna had one big problem that weighed on her heart like a heavy stone. She could not have a baby boy. Every time she tried to have a child, it was always a girl. And no matter how clean her house was, or how many maids she had, Muna could not solve this problem. Her wealth couldn't help her. Her beauty couldn't help her. And as the days went by, Muna became more and more desperate. She wanted a son, a boy who would one day become the king, and she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. But the harder she tried, the more disappointed she became. Every time she thought she was pregnant with a boy, it turned out to be a girl. And Muna, with all her pride, began to feel a storm brewing in her heart. The race to have a baby boy was on, and Muna wasn't going to lose, no matter what. Muna's desire to be the mother of the future king grew stronger with each passing day. The thought of her son wearing the crown and ruling the village filled her dreams. She was determined, no, desperate, to give birth to a boy. And when Muna wanted something, she would stop at nothing to get it. Muna began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't picking the right man. So she decided to marry different men, thinking one of them would surely give her the son she longed for. It wasn't long before she started stealing husbands from the women in the village. When Muna heard that a woman was pregnant, she would snatch the woman's husband, offering him gifts and money until he left his wife for her. The women couldn't fight back. Muna was too powerful, too rich, and with their husbands gone, these women were left with nothing but tears. Muna, on the other hand, felt no guilt. She was focused on one thing, having a baby boy who would be king. She married one man after the other, each time hoping for a son. But every time she became pregnant, she would visit the herbalist. The herbalist would look into his cowrie shells, nod his head, and say, "Muna, it is a girl." Muna's heart would sink like a stone in deep water. A girl again. She didn't want girls. She wanted a boy. And each time the herbalist said it was a girl, Muna would end the pregnancy. She couldn't bear to give birth to a girl when she wanted a boy so badly. The women in the village whispered behind her back, "Muna will never have a son." But she didn't listen. She continued her search, taking more husbands and marrying more men, hoping one of them would finally give her the boy she desired. But still, each time it was the same, a girl. You see, from the day it had been announced that the next male child of the village would become the future king, Muna's heart had started growing darker, and her desperation turned into a deep, restless storm inside her. She would not stop. She could not stop. She believed that one day she would give birth to a boy, and that boy would wear the crown of the village. But how long could this go on before everything fell apart? Muna's obsession with having a son burned deeper with each passing day. She couldn't bear the thought of another woman giving birth to a boy before her. Her desperation pushed her into seeking darker solutions. She needed to be the only one to bear the future king. One night she visited a powerful sorcerer who lived far in the thick forest. The sorcerer's face was old and wrinkled like an ancient tree, and his voice was as rough as the wind through dry leaves. "What do you want, Muna?" he asked, though he already knew. "I want to be the only woman in this village to give birth to a boy," Muna said, her eyes burning with greed. "No other woman must have a son before me." The sorcerer thought for a moment, then smiled a dark, twisted smile. "I will give you what you want, but it comes with a price," he said. He handed her a small black charm. "This charm will make sure no woman in the village will give birth to a son. As long as they drink from the village stream, they will only have daughters. But you must do something first." Muna's heart raced. She was ready for anything. "What must I do?" she asked. The sorcerer leaned in closer, his voice low. "Every night you must go to the village river and bathe openly under the moon. Let everyone see you, for it will make the charm stronger. Only after you've bathed will you drop the charm into the river, letting no one notice you. Then the curse will take effect." He paused for a while, then said, "Above all, you must not drink from that river once you start. If you do, the consequences are beyond what my mouth could say." Muna was shocked, bathing openly in the river in front of everyone, but her desire to have a son was stronger than her pride. She nodded, taking the charm with her. That night, as the moon shone bright, Muna walked to the village river. The water glistened under the silver light, and the village was quiet. But some curious eyes were still awake. The villagers whispered as they watched Muna, the richest woman, walk to the river and begin to bathe openly. She washed herself in the cool water, her heart beating fast. The villagers watched in silence, confused by what they were seeing. Muna, who was always neat and private, was now bathing for all to see, but no one dared ask her why. After bathing, Muna carefully took the charm and dropped it into the water. The charm sank, disappearing into the depths of the river, and with it, the curse began. From that night on, no woman in the village would be able to give birth to a son. Only Muna could break the curse when she was ready. Muna felt powerful. She believed she had finally won. As she walked away from the river, dripping with water and pride, she smiled to herself. "Now only I will give birth to a boy," she thought. But little did she know, her actions would have consequences far beyond her control. After years of heartache and disappointment, Muna finally became pregnant again. As always, she visited the herbalist to find out the gender of the baby. The herbalist looked at his cowrie shells, then shook his head. "It's a girl," he said softly. Muna's heart sank. She had heard those words too many times, but this time something inside her told her not to end the pregnancy. She decided, "I will keep this child, no matter what." Weeks turned into months, and Muna prepared herself for the arrival of another daughter. Then, on a quiet night, the time came. The moon hung high in the sky, and the stars twinkled like diamonds. Muna's cries echoed through the village as she gave birth. But when the baby was placed in her arms, Muna gasped. It wasn't a girl, it was a boy, a strong, healthy boy. Her heart raced with joy and disbelief. The thing she had wanted for so long had finally happened. Tears of happiness filled her eyes. "My son," she whispered, holding the baby close to her chest. "You will be king. You will wear the crown. The village will bow before us." Muna imagined her future, filled with power and riches beyond her wildest dreams. She saw herself ruling the village with her son by her side. Everything she had done, all the sacrifices she had made, had finally paid off. She believed that nothing could stop her now. But that same night, something strange happened in the village, something Muna could never have predicted. While she was still celebrating the birth of her son, her maid, Amina, also gave birth, and to everyone's shock, Amina gave birth to a boy too. When Muna heard the news, her joy turned to fury. How is this possible? She thought. No one else should be able to have a son. She had bathed openly at the river every night. She had cursed the village's water. No other woman was supposed to give birth to a boy. Yet her own maid had done just that. Muna's heart filled with anger and jealousy. She knew that Amina's baby could threaten her son's chance to become king. If the village found out about Amina's son, they might choose him instead. Muna couldn't allow that to happen. In her rage, Muna made a terrible decision. She decided to get rid of Amina and her baby before anyone in the village found out. She would stop at nothing to protect her dreams of power. Muna's heart, once filled with joy, now grew cold as she plotted her next move. Muna's heart burned with jealousy and fear. She knew she had to act fast before the village discovered that Amina had also given birth to a boy. Late that night, when the village was asleep, she called for 3 of her strongest and most loyal men. Their faces were hard like stoning, and their hands were skilled in dangerous tasks. I need you to take care of something for me, Muna said coldly. Go to Amina's hut, end her life, and take the baby. Make sure no one finds out. The men nodded without question. They took their weapons, sharp blades and a large sack, and set out under the cover of darkness. The night was still, with only the sounds of crickets and the whispering wind. They moved like shadows through the village, unseen by anyone. When they reached Amina's small hut, they could hear the soft cries of the newborn baby inside. They crept closer, their hands gripping their weapons tightly. But just as they were about to strike, something unexpected happened. Akiti, the strongest of the 3 men, stepped forward to lead the attack. But as he looked down at the baby, his heart froze. He recognized the child. The boy was his own son. Memories flashed through his mind. His secret moments with Amina, their love hidden from the eyes of the village. He couldn't do it. He couldn't kill his own child. No, Akiti whispered, stepping back. The other 2 men looked at him in confusion. We have to follow orders, one of them hissed, raising his blade. But Akiti, filled with the sudden strength of a father's love, turned on them. In a fierce struggle, he fought off the other 2 men. Blades clashed, and the quiet night was broken by the sound of their battle. Akiti overpowered them, knocking them to the ground. One of the men lay still, defeated, but the other crawled away, injured, leaving a trail of blood behind him as he fled back to Muna. Breathing heavily, Akiti turned to Amina, who was shaking with fear. We have to leave, he said urgently. He gathered her and the baby in his arms and led them away from the hut, heading for the far edge of the village. They would find safety there until morning, and then they could announce the birth of their son to the chief priest and the village. But Akiti knew Muna wouldn't give up so easily. The battle was far from over. Akiti, his heart pounding like a drum, led Amina and their baby through the darkness, their footsteps light and quick. The night air was cool, and the stars seemed to guide them as they moved toward the far edge of the village. Akiti knew they had to hide until morning, when they could return to announce the birth of their son to the village and the chief priest. His plan was to reveal the truth before Muna could act again. Amina, still trembling, held her baby tightly to her chest. What if they find us? She whispered, her voice shaky. They won't, Akiti replied firmly, though he wasn't sure himself. We'll stay hidden until the morning. Then everyone will know about our son, and no one will be able to harm us. Meanwhile, back at Muna's grand house, the injured man crawled through the door, his clothes stained with blood. He groaned, dragging himself across the floor, until Muna stood over him, her eyes flashing with anger. "What happened?" she demanded, her voice cold. The man, weak and barely able to speak, gasped out, "Akiti, he betrayed us. He saved the woman and her baby. I couldn't stop him." Muna's face twisted with rage. She had been so close to getting rid of Amina and her baby. Now, everything was at risk. If the village found out about the baby boy, all her plans would crumble like dry leaves in the wind. Furious, Muna wasted no time. She called for more of her men, stronger and more ruthless than the first. "Go after them," she ordered. "Find them before dawn, and this time, make sure they don't escape." The men, with grim faces and sharp weapons, set off into the night. They knew the tiniest routes and the darkest paths through the forest. Muna had given them strict orders. No mercy, no mistakes. As the earliest hours of the morning crept closer, Akiti and Amina stayed hidden in the shadows at the edge of the village, unaware that more danger was coming. Akiti held Amina close, whispering words of comfort, but his mind was restless. He knew Muna would not give up so easily. The sound of footsteps in the distance sent a chill down Akiti's spine. He gripped his